We have heard of FBI's most wanted, CIA's most wanted, Scotland Yard's most wanted, but who exactly are India's most wanted? Criminals so heinous, so terrifying that there's a list only for them. And worst of all, criminals that are still on the prowl. India too has a list like that. And today we will dive into it, trying to figure out 5 of its most mind-boggling criminals. Hi everyone, welcome to the Desi Crime Podcast, a show where we dive deep into some of the craziest cases from around South Asia. I'm your host Aryaan.
And I'm Aishwarya.
And the case that we have for you today is, well, not one case, but 5 different cases.
So Aryaan, this is a list that I've never previously heard of. Obviously, the FBI's most wanted list is a very famous and notorious one. But how exactly is India's list determined? Is there a criteria?
Yeah, so I went looking for it, right? Once all these most wanted FBI people popped up on my feed, I was like, there has to be the India's most wanted.
Right.
So the list can be found on CBI's website, and it's a long, long list of criminals ranging from the Dawood Ibrahims of the world that we all know about, but to certain stories and certain criminals that we really are not, we don't know their stories in popular culture. And these are all people against whom an Interpol red notice has been issued.
Oh, wow.
Interpol, as you know, and you've talked about this in the podcast before, is the international
organization.
It's the international police.
Yeah.
And whenever a criminal is wanted across the globe, so in more than one country or in a country different from where they committed the crime, the Interpol issues a red notice that activates the police in all those countries to help find that. And so the people that we are talking about today are fugitives wanted around the world.
All right. So tell us, Aryaan, who is the most wanted person on this list?
Aishwarya, the most wanted of any of them is the Whole Truth protein bar, actually. Ash, we constantly harp about how Whole Truth bars are cleanest, tastiest, most honest.
Absolutely.
But I think I'm the living embodiment of it.
Okay.
I just want our viewers and listeners to know that while this may be a sponsorship, I think I'm addicted.
The extent of the addiction.
Here I have my Swiggy orders from the last 15 days. It's unedited. It's the actual app, not Photoshop, not edited or anything. And this is the first time Aishwarya will be reading them. And please give me your unadulterated take of my orders.
I'm so curious. This is about to be really fun. All right. So this is the order from the 23rd of October. The Whole Truth Food Protein Bar, double cocoa, no added sugar.
The best one.
But also 1 origami 2-ply kitchen tissue paper roll.
Don't read out all my orders, Aishwarya. Come on now.
This is so funny. Pack of 2, 60 pulls.
Hey,
I don't know what that means.
Don't read out
next
other
order,
things
next order. 22nd of October, the Whole Truth Protein Bar, double cocoa, no added sugar. Another one. 21st October, which is just a day before, the Whole Truth Protein Bar, okay, hazelnut cocoa, no added sugar.
To be fair, I did order a lot of these, and this is an excuse because you'll keep finding more orders. But I ordered for friends who came from Austria, and I made them try the bar, and they went absolutely gaga over it.
Really?
Bro, because it's not fucking sugars added. I was so surprised. They're so sweet. I was sure, man, like any artificial sugar or whatever. But fucking dates, awesome.
The only issue with this addiction is that he's spending all of the sponsorship money back on Whole Truth.
Guys,
I think the only problem.
This is a bit of a problem, Whole Truths. Whoever's listening from the Whole Truth team, I think I need more free
SOS.
bars, because what's the point of a sponsorship if I give it back to you? But Ash, when we say it's the tastiest, the cleanest, the most honest, these aren't just values we are reading off a script. It's values we truly believe. And this is evidence of my addiction. So if you guys want to get your hands on these bad boy bars or the proteins, visit thewholetruthfoods.com and use code DESI20 at checkout for 20% off. Number 5. Subhash Agarwal. August 22nd, 2003 was a humid day in Bombay. Monsoons were in full sway. It's not the best time of the year to visit the city, but Asha Goyal had made the long-haul, arduous journey all the way from Canada nonetheless. She wasn't visiting for sightseeing, you see. instead to look after her brother Suresh Agarwal. Suresh had been sick recently and his sister came to keep tabs on him. But take note, while she cared for her brother, this wasn't a family without its fair share of issues. Asha had 6 siblings, 3 brothers and 3 sisters: Suresh, Uma, Aruna, Karuna, Subhash and Shekhar. It's true that this started off as a loving joint family, but things took a dire turn in 1989 when their father, Ranchhod Das Agarwal, died unexpectedly. What remained was his property worth $12 million, and along with it, a paper that would bring ruin to his family: his will. Now, it's customary in India for the major share of property to go to the eldest son, which in this case was Suresh, or at least be divided equally among all of them. But Ranchhod wanted something different. He didn't love all 6 of his kids the same. Of his sons, he reserved his affection and his inheritance to Shekhar, the youngest of the 3. He wanted Shekhar to have all his property, in stark contrast to tradition. This will was an inflection point for this family of 7. While the sisters didn't care for the property for themselves, they did want to honor their father's desire, something he had made extremely clear over the years. The one to take charge of this was Asha Goyal. This led to fracture in the family's social fabric. While they were all cordial with each other, an air of distrust loomed large. While most of the family, including Suresh, lived on Malabar Hill in Bombay, Asha had immigrated to Canada along with her brother Subhash. She moved there in 1963 and enjoyed a successful medical practice as an obstetrician gynecologist. Over a 40-year career, she had delivered more than 10,000 babies in Orangeville and Ontario. She specialized in what is called complicated births, so much so that many of her patients have named their children Asha because if it wasn't for her, the babies wouldn't have been alive. What she didn't know is that on this trip to India in 2003, she wouldn't be able to save herself. When she came to India in August of that year, it wasn't for property, but for her brother's health. It was late that night. She was living with Suresh at his flat at Sudhakar Building on Malabar Hill. This is one of the poshest areas in Bombay, but Asha was too old and too tired to party in the sprawling neighborhood. She called it an early night and slipped into her bed. The next morning, the domestic help visited her room for morning chai, but his knocks received no response. He waited, but sensed something was off, something awry. More knocks, but still nothing. Ultimately, he forcefully barged into her room to a scene he would never forget. A bloodied bed lay in front, and a bloodied corpse on it. It didn't take a forensic expert to deduce that Dr. Asha Goyal had been bludgeoned to death. This was clearly a tragedy, and anyone's first impulse would have been to look for the culprit. But Suresh, the owner of the house where his sister Asha died, insisted that this was clearly a suicide. In the same building lived Dr. Misra, a neighbor at Sudhakar Apartments. He rushed to offer his help, only to be astounded by Suresh's response. When he analyzed the corpse, it was evident to him by the pattern of injuries that this was homicide. Asha had been murdered. He demanded the police be called immediately. It took weeks to figure out what exactly went down on the night of 22nd August inside that apartment on Malabar Hill. But as evidence was gathered, a picture was painted. One name popped up. Central to this investigation was a suspect named Pradeep Parab. Pradeep was the night clerk at the Little Lodge, a guest house owned and operated by Subhash and Suresh, the very same brothers whose name wasn't included in the will. The police smelled foul play but needed more to bite. A watchman at the night lodge, Shinde Kaka, had seen this night clerk leave the premises on the night of the 22nd. This was odd to Shinde Kaka because Pradeep was supposed to be inside the Little Lodge, not outside it. And to the security guard's surprise, along with him was Manohar Shinde, the manager of the guest house. He too should have been inside the lodge, not outside. Both Pradeep and Manohar entered a Santro and zoomed off. The answer lay with Pradeep, the police thought. He was grilled continuously for days until he finally broke. After 2 weeks of interrogation, the clerk began talking. And what happened on that fateful night became clear. Suresh had been distraught by the injustice of his father's will. Those $12 million could have been his, he thought as the years passed. He was the oldest son after all. It's mine, he grumbled, and the sense of injustice metastasized into a ravenous desire to make it his, but not without some insistence from his younger brother. It was actually Subhash, a few years his junior, that pushed Suresh over the limit, that prodded Suresh. Subhash kept feeding him the unfairness of their father's actions, all while sitting away in Canada. The two finally concocted a plan to create a false will and take the matter to court. But this plan was intercepted by Asha, who made it clear that she would stand by her father's original will. And so the assassination plot formed.
Alright, Aryan, so this is a story of a family riddled by a property dispute, something unfortunately is not uncommon.
Commonplace, yeah.
Right? All across the world, not just in India or South Asia. But what did this family think? The only hurdle in their plan isn't one sister, Asha. They're a family of 6 siblings, right?
Yeah.
And so did they think they would get rid of all siblings?
No,
or
but it was Asha who was the one who made it very clear that if a fake will was ever taken to court,
Right.
she is the one who's going to voice against it.
But-
She's not going to be sequestered.
But if they were going to kill her, then there would still be other siblings that would come forward and raise their voice against that. Maybe not against the will, but against
I
her murder.
fully agree. To me, it made no sense
To
that
kill
they
just one
thought
sibling, yeah.
killing one sibling would get them away with
Right.
it. But that's the calculus they came up with. And so the assassination plot formed. Remove Asha and get $12 million. The property clearly was far more valuable than their sister. Subhash masterminded this whole murder plot remotely from Toronto, where he enjoyed the luxuries of Canadian citizenship. He needed 4 people for his plan. We have already met the first 2, the ones that the guards saw leave, Pradeep and Manohar. Apart from them, Subhash appointed Pavan Kumar Goenka, his right-hand man who managed all his dealings in India, and Narendra Goyal, Suresh's son-in-law. They, along with the employees of Little Lodge, drove to Sudhakar Apartments late that night in their Santro. One of them stayed in the car to keep watch, while the other 3 scurried towards the apartment. They were greeted by liftman Chaudhary. At their command, he directed the lift to the 14th floor. The plan was simple, to suffocate Asha with a pillow. They stealthily entered her room and in a breath smothered Dr. Goyal. But little did they know that she ain't the kind of person who's going down without a fight. The woman fought off her assailants. She had given birth to 10,000 babies. She wasn't dying this easily. As she beat up the men and screamed for help, they ran to the kitchen, got a paring knife and a vegetable peeler and began stabbing her. That still wasn't enough to bring down this brave lady. She kept retaliating with whatever little force she could muster against 3 men. Pradeep, having had enough, brought a large granite block from the living room and bashed her head with it. And that was that. Dr. Goyal heaved her last. Instead of leaving immediately, the men stole her belongings, purse, jewelry, mobile phone. Pavan and Pradeep meanwhile washed their blood-stained clothes and hurriedly stuffed it into a bag. Liftman Chaudhary was again greeted by the same 3 men, but this time their clothes had changed. They looked disheveled, and they had a handbag they didn't have before. In his confession, Pradeep revealed that he committed the murder for a mere 10,000 rupees or 150 Canadian dollars, and as his luck may have it, Suresh refused to pay even that meager amount to the night clerk, even threatening to kill him. Beyond testimony, the murder of Asha Goyal has since been proven by DNA evidence tested by the Ontario Forensic Sciences Lab in Canada and the Warnex Labs also in Canada, quote, tying the accused to the crime scene, namely the loose hairs of the accused all over the blood-soaked pajamas of the victim, end quote. But justice in this case has not even been scratched, let alone delivered. From delay tactics by the defendants to the variability of extradition law to constantly changing judges, it wasn't until August 24, 2022 that the case was taken on by a Mumbai special court. But there still has been no movement. Sanjay Goyal, Asha's son, has visited India more than 90 times since her murder for court hearings and his fight for justice. Asha's 86-year-old husband, although in his final years, hasn't yet given up. It is gut-wrenching to read Sanjay's statement on the 19th anniversary of his mother's murder. Quote, the case against my mother's killers is strong, but it is deteriorating given the passage of time and Canada's reluctance to get involved. Now, one of the warring brothers, Suresh, the architect of the crime, has died. One of the hired killers charged in the case has also died. My aunt, a key witness to the events that led up to the murder, has died too. Evidence collected over the years has been misplaced in India, jeopardizing the trial. Certain key documents have expired due to statutes of limitations that govern their enforcement shelf life. I fear my 82-year-old father, who is making the trek to India with me this time, may not ever see justice done for his wife. Sometimes I keep asking myself, would things be different if my mother was a white Canadian? I've seen swift and decisive action in many other cases involving Canadians killed in Mexico, the United States, and Europe. But when it comes to Indo-Canadians being killed in India, there seems to be a different standard. My story is not unlike that of the long-running Canada-India murder case involving the contract killing of Jaswinder Kaur Sidhu, a beautician from Maple Ridge in British Columbia. Sidhu, aka Jassi, was killed in Punjab, India, in June 2000 after she defied her family to marry the man she loved, a poor rickshaw driver from her ancestral village. Within days, Indian police arrested the assassins, who they said were hired by Jassi's mother and uncle living in Canada. It took 18 years, several court cases, 3 documentaries, a made-for-TV movie, a website called justiceforjussi.com, and a book before the pair was extradited to India in 2019. I can only hope that I don't have to wait that long. Canada has so far not helped me get justice for my mom, but many Canadians have, and I thank you for that. End quote. Only time will tell if Dr. Asha Goel will get justice. The issue is, she's running out of it. Number 4. Sukumar Kurup. It was 22nd January 1984. The clocks ticked past 4 a.m. in the Kunnum area of Kerala. The sun was moments away from peering over when another blazing object stole the sun's thunder. In the middle of a paddy field, a car was on fire. It was a black Ambassador slowly turning ashen. The number plate could barely be made out. KLQ 7831. A local was battling the early morning blues as he passed over the Kolakadavu bridge. His pupils hadn't yet fully adjusted to the misty darkness when suddenly they were lit up by this eerie source of luminescence. As he probed the car from afar, he saw a silhouette in the driver's seat. A man, burning, dying, lay there. Alarm bells went off for him. He rushed to a nearby house and awoke Suresh Kumar and Radha Krishnan Achari. The locals too agreed that there was a charred body in the car that they could make out, but that this wasn't the time for heroism. The doors of the Mavelikara police station flung open as 3 anxious men barged in demanding help. What awaited the head constable was a scene that would define his career. By the time the police arrived at the scene of the burning Ambassador, word had already made the rounds in Kunnum and nearby villages. You didn't need roosters or sunrise to wake up the residents of Kerala on 22nd January 1984. The first policeman to reach was Deputy Superintendent of Police PM Haridas. He asked locals for what they knew. Present there was a 20-year-old political worker, Murli Vrindavanam, whose family ran a ration shop in the area. According to him, quote, the car was such a ball of fire that we couldn't see anything inside initially. But after some time, when the blaze was put out partially, we realized that there was a person inside who looked as if he was tied to the seat. End quote. According to everyone gathered there, they knew who this someone was. It was Sukumar Kurup. They were sure of it, not only because the charred body slightly resembled his, because they recognized the car. Black Ambassadors were a statement then as they would be now. Not every Tom, Dick and Harry drove one around. Locals knew whom this one belonged to, especially because the car plate KLQ 7831 was still visible. Sukumar had just returned to Kerala from the Gulf. He was an NRI working at the Abu Dhabi Marine Operating Company who was back to meet his family. He lived just 5 kilometers from where his body was found in a village called Cheryanad. But Superintendent Haridas knew better than just taking gossip at face value. In his diary, he noted that the body was, quote, said to be Sukumar Kurup, end quote. Said to be, not yet proven, but in due time, that too would happen. The police began their investigation immediately. On first glance, it appeared to be an accident. An overspeeding car, the driver lost control, bam, it lands up in flames in a paddy field. But let's be honest, that's not how accidents work. You don't have an undamaged chassis when there's a high-impact accident. Usually there are dents before there is a fire. In the case of this Kerala-registered Ambassador, there was just fire. And on closer inspection, Detective Haridas found a matchbox, slippers, and a glove with hair stuck to it near the car. In the air also was a scant scent of gasoline. A witness also said, quote, some locals who were returning after watching a late-night play recalled seeing a couple of people driving away from the spot in another car, end quote. Something more sinister than an accident was afoot, and Haridas's hunch was confirmed when the medico-forensic team showed up. This was led by the reputed police surgeon, Dr. B. Umadatan. The nature of the corpse was such that transporting it to the nearest hospital would waste precious time. Owing to the heat, it was decomposing at an unprecedented rate. If the corpse were to deduce anything from an autopsy, it would have to happen now. So to everyone's surprise, the surgeon performed the post-mortem right there in the field. And what he found convinced him that this couldn't possibly be a road accident. Quote, When I examined the parts of the body that hadn't been scorched, I couldn't see any signs of the body being burnt while alive. Then I cut open the body to examine the lungs and the trachea. I was sure that my assumptions were right. There was no sign of soot inside. If he had been alive while the car was burning, smoke and soot would have entered the body. End quote. The man in the car wasn't breathing when the car was lit on fire. That meant he had died long before. It meant that his body was put in the car and then someone lit the car on fire. But if not an accident, who could have wanted to kill Sukumar Kurup? The answers came as interrogations began. First to be questioned by DSP Haridas was Bhaskara Pillai, Kurup's brother-in-law. He claimed to know the murderers. It was Kurup's enemies in Abu Dhabi who wanted him dead. He was adamant that the employee of Abu Dhabi Marine Operating Company was tracked down by Middle Eastern assassins and killed him. As he lamented, Haridas could give a lesser damn about his story. His eyes were fixated on the oddest detail: Pillai's sleeves. Given the weather conditions, everyone was wearing half-sleeve shirts and tees. Despite the warm weather, the devastated brother-in-law had a full-sleeve shirt. I remember when I gave my final board exams in senior year, I too wore a full-sleeve shirt to the exam to hide the physics equations written all over my hand. And I was almost caught when I was asked to roll up my sleeves. Luckily, the teacher didn't spot the equation to derive the G constant. Pillai wasn't as lucky as me. Haridas demanded him to roll up his sleeves too, and what he found weren't equations, but burn marks. Bhaskara Pillai had been burnt by something, and it was evident on his hands and even his hair that seemed rough. With the burning ambassador sitting in the Mavelikara police station compound, it could only mean one thing. And Pillai broke. He confessed to killing his brother-in-law. It was revenge for not getting him a job in the Gulf like Kurup had promised, and a way to steal his money. The police had made a breakthrough, it seemed, but then Haridas caught wind of information from his undercover cop. You see, right when it was discovered that this body might belong to Sukumar Kurup, Haridas had told one of his men to visit Kurup's house in Cheryanad in plain clothes. What this indiscernible cop found was not an inconsolable family in tatters. It was a happy household, enjoying a celebratory dish of chicken curry. It's like eating cheesecake when you found out a beloved one has passed away. Quote, even at the time of Kurup's supposed death, I could gauge that there wasn't real grief in his house. No one appeared sad that the most important member of the family had passed away. What's more, they had even prepared chicken curry for lunch the day of the accident. In those days, chicken was reserved only for special occasions and certainly not cooked when there's been a death in the family. End quote, said Haridas. Clearly, they were missing the whole truth. But it did not take long for Haridas to piece the next bit of the puzzle. You see, the black ambassador did in fact belong to Kurup, and Kurup hadn't in fact returned home the night before, so it was reasonable to assume that the dead man in the car was him. Except that whenever Kurup did visit India, he didn't drive this car. He was instead driven around in a taxi by a driver named Ponappan. This guy, when interrogated, buckled under pressure like the cheap Olympic Village cardboard pets. He gave an altogether different story that the burnt man wasn't Kurup, but someone he had hit and run over accidentally. The burning of the body was a careless cover-up. Haridas called BS again. Ponappan was pressed further and yet again he caved. He said Sukumar Kurup was alive. Sukumar Kurup was the mastermind behind this burning ambassador, and Sukumar Kurup had just been dropped off at a lodge in the nearby city of Aluva, 100 kilometers away.
Wow, Aryaan. I mean, I don't even know what to say. There is housekeeping that I think you'll have to do for me. So we have this brother-in-law who's acting shady right in the aftermath of this supposed accident.
Yeah.
But his sleeves are rolled down. He has burn marks. His hair is weird.
His story changes from Middle Eastern assassins to hell, I did it.
I did it, right.
Yeah.
And the family celebrating. So something is seeming off to the inspector right off the bat. Then they end up talking to this driver who used to drive Kurup around.
Yeah.
Who says that he's not Kurup, but someone he's hit?
Yeah, somebody he hit and run over and burned to cover up his tracks.
And so at this point, the brother-in-law has confessed to the killing. But now the driver is saying there is no killing.
There is no killing.
He's dropped this guy off in a
Correct.
city nearby.
Correct.
This is all very odd.
Yeah, but it's all going to become crystal clear to you in just a few minutes.
I can't wait.
The cops had to rush to this lodge to nab this conniving criminal, but before that, like Aishwarya asked, whose body was it in the car? What the hell was Kurup's plan? And most importantly, who the hell is Sukumar Kurup? Well, he was born Gopala Krishna Kurup, you see, in a middle class family in Kerala. He was a bright kid who got into the Air Force right after school. A life of prestige awaited him. But Kurup's temperament wouldn't allow him to be ordered around by another officer. While he joined the Indian Air Force as an airman, after a long leave at home, he never returned and was marred with the tag of a deserter. This was the inflection point in his career of cunningness. First, he bribed a head constable in the special branch of the police to file a report to the Indian Air Force stating that Gopala Krishna Kurup had died, thereby freeing him of the deserter tag. Next, he applied for a passport and changed his name to Sukumar Kurup. But giving up his name did not mean relinquishing his life of lies. Those were just getting started. Kurup had a streak of rebellion. He fell in love with the daughter of his maid named Sarasama, and against the family's desire, secretly got married to her at a temple in Matunga. From that point on, his life only got better. For all his rebellious and adventurous proclivities, Kurup was loved by his peers and friends. He was an extrovert and a generous one. He formed a close group of friends in Abu Dhabi. They recall his magnanimity. If they ever went out for food or drinks, Kurup was the first to take on the bill. Whenever he visited his home village, he'd bring a separate suitcase just with goodies for everyone. Meanwhile, Sarasama finished her nursing course and got a job at a private hospital in the Gulf. If everything was going so well, then why would this guy hatch a murder plan? For that, you can blame an extravagant lifestyle and a detective story. Kurup's generosity came at a cost. The cost of his own bank balance. Despite raking in a joint income of 60,000 rupees, which was decent for the 1980s, their savings were hand to mouth. They had bought land in their village that they had to pay installments for, and with layoffs looming at his company, Kurup was financially insecure. Around that time, he read a detective magazine that sowed a seed of murder. According to the Indian Express, quote, the story was that a man killed another person who held a physical resemblance to him, put him in the driver's seat of his car, set fire to it to make it appear as an accident, and then claimed insurance for his life. End quote. Sounds familiar? To effect this exact plan, Kurup selected his driver, Ponappan, his brother-in-law, Bhaskara Pillai, and his friend from the Gulf, Shahu. He took out a life insurance policy worth $80,000 or 50 lakh rupees and promised to divide it among his 3 accomplices. According to Detective Haridas, quote, Kurup's initial idea was to get an unclaimed dead body for the operation. Pillai had a relative who worked at the medical college and he felt it wouldn't be difficult to source a dead body. Or else a body could be scavenged from a cemetery. But when Pillai told him that sourcing a dead body was impossible, Kurup casually suggested murder. And just like that, everyone got on board. End quote. They bought a second-hand ambassador for rupees 10,000 and on the night of January 21st, 1984, got drunk, ate to their heart's desire, and headed to the highways of Kerala to look for their victim. They drove for a while with no success. No victim in sight. It wasn't until they drove past the Hari movie theatre that they spotted a man sticking his thumb out. This was Chaco, a film representative who was returning home after assessing the ticket collections at the same theatre. Chaco asked them if they were heading in his direction, and they happily agreed. Once inside, Pillai offered the tired man a drink of brandy. He politely declined, but Pillai impolitely insisted. A scared Chaco chucked the laced drink and passed out. Using a towel, Pillai and Shahu strangled the innocent hitchhiker to death. Then they followed the story in the magazine to the T. They got off at Smita Bhavan, which is Kurup's wife's native place. They burnt Chaco's face to make it absolutely unrecognizable, put him in the Black Ambassador, drove it to the paddy field, lit it on fire, and drove off. Finally, at 4 a.m., it caught the attention of the locals. Now we are back to the moment where Ponappan breaks down and reveals Kurup's location. Their plan has been foiled and their mastermind is about to be caught. When the cops reach the lodge in Aluva around 3 a.m., the receptionist is shown Kurup's picture. They acknowledge they know him. He was their guest. But he had just left moments ago to catch a train. Aboard the Malabar Express, Kurup disappeared forever. Sukumar Kurup, formerly known as Gopala Krishna Kurup, has been on the run for the past 40 years. The hunt for Kurup has since spanned across India, hell, across the world, but he is nowhere to be found. Investigators through the decades have tried taking on the case almost like a game of pride, but always failed. Many cops have put in their own money to find him, but he continues to evade them. Many have reported seeing Kurup all over India. If he is alive today, he's 77 years old. Sukumar's accomplices have all served time in prison and he never got 50 lakh rupees. But what he has earned is a cult-like status in Kerala of the man who vanished in thin air. Number 3. Bhadreshkumar Chetanbhai Patel. If you ever walk into the American embassy in Delhi, there's one portrait plastered all over the boards and the bulletins. It's an A4 poster. On it is a portrait of a somber-looking Indian gentleman. His name? Bhadreshkumar Chetanbhai Patel. Turns out, he's anything but gentle. Before your eyes can stare into his, you are caught by a warning. Wanted. Reward $250,000. Who is this man who is not only wanted by Indian authorities but has the world's most powerful police force scouring for him, the FBI?
So, Aryaan, when I went for my US visa application to the American embassy, and this was the year 2019 when I was just about to leave for college, this tells you the true crime fanatic in me was always alive and thriving. 2019, I walk in and this man is everywhere, right? And at the time, I don't think I'm like using my phone. I'm around whatever the officials of the embassy. So in my mind, I'm like repeating his name over and over again so I can remember it when I go back home and actually look up the story.
Yeah.
But his story has since captivated me so much and I really wanted to cover it on the podcast, but I'm so glad you're doing it today.
There
But
you
he's
go.
all over that embassy. And it's
He's
really
all over that
scary,
embassy.
very
It's very jarring when you're
Yeah.
going in as a legal migrant going,
Yep.
please give me a visa.
Yeah.
I know. The story of this man, who is on the top 10 FBI's most wanted list, starts in Gujarat, in a town called Viramgam. Bhadreshkumar Chetanbhai Patel was born on May 15, 1990. Not much is known of his early life, but we do know that when he turned 23 years old, the demands of society had caught up with him. His parents had found him a partner. This was a 20-year-old girl named Palak. Their marriage gets agreed upon in 2013. Arranged marriages have a funny way of expediting the romantic stages of love. In August of 2013, the pair met, and by November, they were married. 3 months and the business of a lifelong mate was settled. But how long exactly was this mate going to last? Palak was soon about to find out. For almost a year, the relationship dragged on per usual. It was your run-of-the-mill arranged marriage. Bhadresh was a 5'9" Gujju boy running a middle-class household. But as it happened, his parents were not in Gujarat. They were not even in India. They were settled in New Jersey, America. In September of 2014, Bhadresh's mother falls sick. To attend to her, the couple flew to America on a B1, B2 visitor visa. This visa allows you entry into the States, in their case as a tourist, allows you to stay in America for a maximum of 6 months per calendar year, and most importantly, doesn't allow you to seek employment. You're a tourist, not a worker. What started off as a short check-in visit didn't seem to have a checkout date. When Bhadresh landed in the Newark airport in September of 2014, it appears that he had made up his mind to never return to India. Palak soon found out this decision as Bhadresh kept refusing to return to their home country. September became February and 2014 turned to 2015. The couple had surpassed their maximum permissible time to be in America continuously, but no return ticket was on the horizon. In fact, Bhadresh and Palak were about to go one step further in violating the terms of their visas by not just overstaying, but also seeking employment. These are your typical illegal immigrants. Bhadresh's zeal to fulfill his American dream of making a name in the land of opportunity consumed him. But the dream was nowhere close to being realized. You see, Bhadresh had reached out to all his connections in the Gujju community in New York and Jersey, but hadn't yet found a job. Meanwhile, he hadn't been able to convince his wife of his dream either. She was hell-bent to return home. She missed it. Finally, in March of that year, although she couldn't go home, home came to her. Her parents decided to pay her a visit to check in on their daughter. They were worried at the couple's decision to overstay their visa and were also worried for their daughter, who was evidently distraught. But it did Palak well having her parents stay for a month. It brought the smile back to the young bride who was now 21. Things seemed on the up and up. The decision to return to India seems to have finally been agreed upon. Palak's parents figured it was best to leave the young lovebirds alone, and on April 7, 2015, they bid their daughter adieu and boarded a flight back to India. Little did they know, their young daughter would never catch that same flight. But see, up until this point, things were actually on the up and up. Bhadresh had finally found a job. He worked in the kitchen at a Dunkin' Donuts in Maryland. Not your classical American dream, but it was a start. The outlet was owned by one of their relatives who employed both Bhadresh and Palak. But this was only meant to be a temporary gig for Palak, who had already started planning a return. In fact, on April 12th at 9:32 pm, CCTV footage from that very Dunkin' Donuts kitchen captures an enthusiastic Palak and Bhadresh talking on speakerphone to a relative in India, discussing how happy she is to come home. Her return to India was scheduled for 17th April, just 5 days from now. It was camera number 3 at that family-owned Dunkin' Donuts joint that captured what went down in the kitchen at 9:32 pm. With the phone in his hand, Bhadresh begins walking towards the back of the kitchen, into what looks like the storage area, away from the purview of the CCTV camera. Palak follows him to continue the conversation she's having on speakerphone. The CCTV captures the moment the couple goes into the back, but in just 40 seconds as the camera footage reads 9:33 pm, Bhadresh walks out. Nothing's out of the ordinary. He resumes his job, switches off the oven, and heads out of the fast food restaurant. Meanwhile, customers at this Maryland Dunkin' are having the worst time. Their orders are pending, nobody to quell their caffeine intake, and there is no one to take new orders. 10 minutes pass and no one turns up on the counter, nor does anyone respond. The customers sense something awry. 911 is called. The Baltimore Police Department arrives at the scene. Usually, cops from the Anne Arundel County frequented this Dunkin' to grab a donut, but today their job was to figure out why nobody was serving them. This routine, rather harmless 911 call was about to put them on the trail of America's most wanted man. As the cops walked into the kitchen, they found it empty. Alarm bells went off. They continued their search and entered the dark back room of the kitchen. What lay in front of the Baltimore police explained the lack of activity at their neighborhood Dunkin'. Palak Patel lay unconscious, bloodied, with multiple abrasions and cuts all over her. At 9:32 pm, Palak Patel was killed. The mode of her death lay beside her. A long knife used to stab her multiple times. But the cause of her death was nowhere to be found. He was on the run. By the time the police accessed the CCTV and deduced Bhadresh's role in his wife's murder, he had made some evasive maneuvers to fend off the police. CCTV footage shows Bhadresh seconds after he brutally murdered his wife. But he looks anything like someone who has blood on their hands. He's cool, calm, and composed. He is a man on a mission. The first thing he does is walk over to their nearby apartment, collect some cash, some clothes, and most importantly, his passport. He then calls a cab that drives him all the way from Maryland to Jersey across state lines. There he arrives at a hotel near the Newark Liberty International Airport at 3 in the morning. He checks in and calls it a night. On the morning of April 13th, he is seen checking out of the hotel at 10 o'clock. He then boards an airport shuttle, but instead of going to the airport, he takes the shuttle all the way to Penn Railway Station in New York. It's at this moment the Baltimore police, the NYPD, and the FBI all lose trail of Bhadreshkumar Chetanbhai Patel. Where he is remains a mystery. The reward for finding him started off at $10,000, then $25,000, then $100,000, and now sits at $250,000, or roughly 2 crore rupees. He hasn't legally left America yet, but could have very well slipped into Canada, or through the Mexico border, made it back to India via a flight. Bhadreshkumar is now 34 years old. He has been on the run for the last 10 years. Why did he kill his wife so brutally? Well, there are no satisfying answers, which is probably why the cops believe this man is a dangerous fugitive. According to investigators, Palak Patel wanted to return to India since their visas had expired the month before, but her husband was against the idea. Quote, the best guess is that he didn't want her to leave, end quote, according to Special Agent Jonathan Schaefer, who's investigating the case from the FBI's Baltimore division. Quote, it's possible that he thought he would be disgraced by her leaving and going back to India. After the crime, his actions show a very cool and calculated mentality about escaping the scene and fleeing the area. End quote.
Okay, Aryaan, so you said that the inspectors are hypothesizing that he killed his wife because it would be a sort of taint to his image. He didn't want her to go back while he was still in the US.
Not the most convincing of theories, but again, that's the best I think anybody can come up with.
I have a better theory. Let me know if it makes sense. I don't know if this... I think so. But if she, after violating the terms of her visa, was to exit the United States and enter India, wouldn't it cause like red alerts? Because this we're talking about 2013, 2014, right? Wouldn't it raise alarm bells on computers of both countries that would then try to find like, okay, you also entered with this other man and where is he? What's his location?
Interesting.
And put him in trouble? Because I don't see a situation where he doesn't want his wife to leave and so kills her. like he loves her so much, he wants her to be in the US with him, and then ends up murdering her. I can see a situation where she's returning, and that raises alarm bells to these people because they flew on like the same ticket, they booked it together, they flew in together, and it like increases his possibilities of getting caught.
Sure. I mean, again, it makes some sense, but murdering somebody would put you more on the police's watch than illegally leaving or your wife illegally leaving.
I don't necessarily agree. With a murder, you know that you can run, right? When you're put...
But he could have done the running he did right now. He could have done that without the purview of the police.
No, but he couldn't have left with her, right? So...
Like, yeah, he could have just left her.
Of course, and I'm not saying all criminals are the most rational people on the face of the planet.
Yeah, but again, this theory to me makes as much sense as the pride theory.
No way.
Ash, I see your argument, but it still doesn't make sense to me that this man whose end goal was the American dream, if we are to presume it was the American dream, right? And he wanted to stay in America. I think if that was the objective, he ideally, rationally should have just run away, right? He shouldn't have killed his wife, which would get the police behind his tail. He could have just run away. I think there is something more to the act of murdering his wife than just wanting to live the American dream.
It's never just that. Of course, their own relationship dynamics, whether or not he ever loved her. These are young kids who got like maybe forcefully married to each other. They weren't the people for each other. He ardently believed in this American dream. She did not, which caused tension.
It could actually be what you
All of
said,
that.
coupled with this youthfulness, coupled with what the police is saying of the feeling of shame if the wife were to return. I think
I'm just trying to pinpoint like the major reason for the act of murder, why she needed to be gotten out of the way. And I don't think he killed her knowing that he was going to run right off the bat. Maybe he killed her thinking that he wasn't going to get caught.
I think he did. In how calculated every step was, in every decision of which hotel to go to, cab to call to, not to go to the airport, despite being in a hotel near the airport, going to Penn Station, which was sort of like a red herring for the police.
But
all of it was done.
He can't anymore leave the US after having violated his visa. Like
a
flight,
so
he would still get caught.
The thing is, you most likely can. There are many ways to cross the borders.
But he doesn't know that, right?
I think he does. In my theory, this man has thought it all out. In my theory, he's thought it all out.
I don't buy that. And I want to know what you guys think. Whose theory do you believe? The police's or mine?
Or my botched up theory.
Yeah.
If you have any information on this case, you can reach out to the FBI in the link in the description. Number 2. Omana Eda. In 2017, an unidentified body surfaced in Malaysia. A woman had jumped or fallen to her death from a building in Subang Jaya. It was the corpse of an old Indian woman. Upon further inspection and involvement in the Indian High Commission, it was discovered that this was a Malayali lady. An image of her face was issued in newspapers and bulletins, and a familiar name popped up. Lady Sukumar Kurup. You heard me right. Even women can commit gruesome murders and go missing forever. Many in Malaysia speculated that this body belonged to the murderer nicknamed Lady Sukumar Kurup. It was always speculated that this killer had absconded to Malaysia. Not only that, the alleged killer had stark similarities with the corpse that was found. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Who is Lady Sukumar Kurup, and why is she on the run? Her name is Omana Eda. She's a doctor and ophthalmologist. She was born in Payanur near Kannur in Kerala, and by 1991 had raised a family of her own. She had a husband, Dr. Radhakrishnan, and 2 children. Her husband also was a doctor, a pediatrician. The two together raked in a healthy monthly income, and from the outside, it couldn't have been a more perfect family. That year, the couple contracted a man named Muralidharan to help build their house. You see, the family was getting bigger and they needed more space. But little did they know, this man they had hired to help build their house would turn out to be a homewrecker. Dr. Omana fell for the man, and the two began an illicit affair behind Radhakrishnan's back. It didn't take long before gossip spread like wildfire about the extramarital affair. It took time for the pediatrician to find out what was happening in his house, but when he did, he was inconsolable. The female doctor's reputation went for a toss. This wasn't supposed to be a public trial, but it sure as hell turned out into one. Out of shame, embarrassment, and the lack of patients visiting her, Dr. Omana left her husband and 2 kids and migrated to Malaysia. There, she took on a new Muslim name, a new identity, and resumed work as a doctor. For years, this trick seemed to have worked, but her lust for Muralidharan didn't subside. Once she settled into the new country, she called her lover to Malaysia to be with her. Once the fire of this affair died, Dr. Eda realized that she didn't really love this man either. Again, she wanted him out of his life. But Muralidharan didn't want out. He had moved to a whole new country for this woman, and now she wants to just call quits. She eventually forced him to move back to Kerala, but he knew he had leverage. So he demanded she send him money, else he would expose to Malaysian authorities that she was illegally working there. For a few months, she complied. But once Muralidharan got a taste of a free paycheck every month, his demands only grew. And in doing so did Dr. Eda's frustrations. In 1996, Dr. Eda had had enough. Muralidharan just had to be eliminated, and she had a plan. She flew to Coimbatore in July of that year. First order of business was purchasing pentothal sodium, syringe and needle under a fake name and address. She was a skilled liar and an expert at maintaining multiple identities. Pentothal sodium is a rapid onset general anesthetic. Instead of staying at a hotel, she retired in the waiting room of the train station. The next day, on July 10th, she went to Kozhikode, dialed Muralidharan from a roadside telephone booth and asked to meet. He couldn't say no. Muralidharan also had a family he had been lying to all this while. He told them that he had business to attend to in Coimbatore and would be gone for a few days. The couple had a rendezvous in Kozhikode. To Muralidharan, this was perfect. Get the money and the lady. But he didn't know he was a lamb being prepared for slaughter. The duo took a train to Ooty, where they stayed at the retiring room of the station on July 11th. As night dawned, the fun was about to commence. Under the pretext of injecting Muralidharan with an opioid-like mood enhancer, Dr. Eda filled up her syringe with the strong anesthetic over the prescribed amount and shot it into her lover's veins. Muralidharan died in that room in minutes, but the real operation began now. Police journals detailed just how incisively the doctor had planned the murder. Within 3 hours, the Ooty waiting room was turned into an OPT. Careful incisions were made to dismember Muralidharan's body into small packets for disposal. In a matter of 3 hours, she single-handedly killed, cut and packed up the remnants of Muralidharan into plastic bags and stuffed it in her suitcase.
And I'm sorry, this is all happening in the waiting room of a train station?
The resting area, yeah.
Is this India we're talking about, where there's people everywhere?
Resting areas you can reserve for yourself. Resting areas you can
get.
Yeah. And especially back in the day, these were very common. Much like the Malcha Mahal. Remember when in New Delhi railway station, she had the VIP lounge all to herself? So there are these resting areas in certain stations that you can have to yourself.
That's crazy.
Yeah. The smaller parts of his body were flushed down the toilet. She then carried the bags outside the station, where she hailed a taxi. Her goal was the same goal as that of the many murderers that visit Ooty: dispose the body in the dense forests of that hill station. In the wee hours of July 12th, one taxi driver decided to give her a ride. It was an early morning for him, and she was likely his first customer. They began driving. Dr. Eda seemed satisfied. On the road, the driver kept wondering if he had driven over roadkill or if a rat had died in his cab. The stench was inescapable. He realized that this wasn't a him problem. It had something to do with the belongings of his passenger. And so he pulled the car aside and demanded to be shown the contents of her bag. Her plan was kaput. As he peered into her bags, he saw neatly tucked plastic bags with organs chopped up. Once he came to his senses, he squeamishly drove to the Kodaikanal police department and lay bare what he saw. Dr. Omana Eda was arrested immediately by the Tamil Nadu police. The case was initially investigated by the Ooty police and later handed over to the crime branch. The infamous doctor was held in the Tamil Nadu jail until January 29, 2001. She got conditional bail to attend to some matters while her case went on in the court. But this bail was all part of her plan. She knew her crime. She knew that once the charge sheet is filed and case goes to court, she has a life in prison awaiting her. In this brief window of freedom, she packed her bags and left forever. It was a major embarrassment for the police of Kerala and Tamil Nadu, but she was gone. Where? No one knew. Most speculate Malaysia owing to her ties, and attempts kept being made to look for her. The court ruled her a murderer and fugitive finally, but sightings of her were far and few. According to a CBCID report, on March 20th, 2009, from the Interpol Secretariat General, France provided inputs of a possible match of the subject in America. However, the police in Washington later confirmed that the person identified was not Omana. Then in 2017, the body of a Malayali woman surfaced. Was that Dr. Omana? Just like Sukumar Kurup, we may never know. This cunning killer, if alive, is 71 years old today. Number 1. Arti Dhir. It's a hot summer day in Gujarat in 2014. 27-year-old Alpa Kardani is stitching clothes at her residence in Malia, Junagadh. It's a mud house with thatched walls, partly to keep the indoors cool, partly because they couldn't afford anything else. All Alpa and her family owned were 10 bighas of land, one that seasonally yielded crop. It was barely enough to sustain them. You see, Alpa's life up until this point had been hard. In 2005, she was married to a man named Lalit, but Lalit died 2 years later of cancer, leaving Alpa a widow. Alpa then married Lalit's older brother Harsukh in hopes of stability, but their household was impervious to hope. To make matters more difficult, Alpa had 5 younger siblings, and when her mother ran away with another man, all 5 siblings along with Alpa's father moved into the small thatched house. Not to mention that Alpa had her own toddler named Raju. So, all in all, life was difficult for them. But in 2014 came hope. Hope in the form of an offer. An NRI couple, namely Kavaljit Singh Raizada and Arti Dhir, were looking to adopt a child. Their efforts to have a kid of their own hadn't borne fruit, so they turned to adoption. For what it's worth, it's a common practice in India for couples to adopt kids from poorer backgrounds, even if the child has parents. In the eyes of the poor parents, it is a sure shot way of providing their kid a better future. That's what Alpa and her now husband Harsukh thought when they looked at 3-year-old Gopal, Alpa's youngest brother.
So Aryan, Alpa and her husband have a kid of their own, right? 3-year-old Raju.
Yes.
But the kid that they're trying to give away, like essentially pawn off to this other couple, is her brother.
The youngest brother, yes, Gopal.
Who's how old?
3 years old as well.
That's crazy.
Yeah, because the family became there's so many people living in that one house. You can only imagine how difficult it is.
Yeah, now obviously, like the instinct is to pass judgment, but I can't imagine poverty of that nature.
Course.
Where
And you have this one opportunity of
Right.
ensuring that your kid becomes a UK citizen, lives there in a rich.
Right.
You're like, might as well.
Right.
Like I said, the household had grown beyond their means, and if Gopal was to be raised in UK, where Kavaljit Singh and Arti were based, he was guaranteed to have a better life than at least the one he was currently destined for. According to Alpa, quote, the children were growing up and had their needs. The seasonal crops we grew on our land were barely enough for the 9 of us. So when we got the offer, we thought at least Gopal's future would be secured. During our meeting, Arti spoke to us in Kishore through an interpreter and promised to take good care of Gopal. So we agreed to the adoption. End quote. It was Kavaljit Singh's father, actually, Mahendra Singh, that suggested the plan for adoption. Mahendra Singh worked as a manager at the Junagadh District Cooperative Bank branch where he met Harsukh. Once both the parties agreed, the paperwork was set in motion. Alpa sat on the sidelines as she saw her youngest brother of 3 being taken away. A sessions court in Veeraval town designated Alpa and Harsukh as Gopal's legal guardians, after which they registered a private adoption deed at the Malia Sub-Registrar's office on July 23, 2015. In this document, Arti, named as the other party, is referred to as Arti Loknath Dhir without any mention of her marital status. Court records show that Kavaljit Singh's parents, Mahendra Singh and Urmila, served as witnesses to this. Although Gopal was now legally adopted by Arti, he continued to live with Alpa since his travel documents, including his passport and most importantly his visa, were not yet processed. Days became years and Gopal turned 6 years old, but he was still stuck in Malia village. His adopted parents rarely saw him as they too awaited the paperwork while being in the UK. But it all came too late. On February 8, 2017, Alpa's baby brother was found lifeless on the side of National Highway 151. All hopes for a better life for him came crashing down. Gopal died before ever setting foot in the UK, before he could ever be put to bed by his new mother Arti. But you see, Arti's plan was never to put the 6-year-old into bed. It was always to put him in his grave. Who is this NRI couple that pops out of thin air seeking an adoption? Arti and Kavaljit Singh married in 2012, but this wasn't a conventional union. While Kavaljit Singh was 28 years old, his new wife Arti was 52 years old, 24 years older than him. And while Kavaljit hailed from the same district in Gujarat as Alpa, Arti was a Kenya-born British citizen. The two were like jigsaw pieces that just did not fit together. Then what brought them together? Well, money. Arti was the boss, you see, and in this young man from a village in India pursuing an MBA in UK, she found a chump, a chela, a crony, a boy that would do what she wants when she wants, however she wants. The plan was never to raise Gopal, it was always to kill him. In fact, within 2 days of adoption paperwork being signed on July 23, 2015, the cunning 52-year-old went to the nearest bank and applied for a 2.5 crore rupees life insurance policy in Gopal's name. That's $300,000. She was even willing to pay an upfront premium of 8 lakhs. On her first attempt, the application was rejected, quote, on grounds that she was trying to purchase a policy within days of adoption, end quote. But that didn't stop her. She went knocking on the doors of bank after bank. According to the police inspector N.K. Vyas of the Junagadh crime branch, quote, Arti finally purchased a 1.3 crore rupee or $200,000 life insurance policy in Gopal's name on August 24th, 2015 and even paid the first annual premium of rupees 13 lakhs, end quote. But it would take 10 years for the policy to mature, unless obviously Gopal somehow died before that. To ensure this happens, Arti lulled in another man into her plan. 27-year-old Nitish Mund, who worked at a London supermarket and was Arti's tenant from 2014 to 2016. He was assured a share of the 1.3 crores. What boggles my mind is how the three of them talked of Gopal not as a human being, not as a kid, but as a stock, an investment. The way you and I would talk about a mutual fund policy maturing, they spoke of Gopal. For example, Nitish had to, quote, invest 4 lakhs for a share in the profit, end quote. This was dehumanizing to say the least. Their plan, however, took time to take fruition, and time was literally money, because as the second year passed, Arti had to pay another premium of 13 lakh rupees. Her profits were being eaten away. Gopal had to die, and die quick. Arti told Nitish that since they had entailed another premium payment, to make it fair, Nitish would have to go to Gujarat and orchestrate the killings himself. For his work, she offered to help him with visa sponsorship. Lured in by the offer, Nitish returned to Rajkot in August of 2016 to resume work at his dad's motor garage. Now he had resolved to kill the kid himself. He was to drive to Gopal's location with his driver, but chickened out at the end moment. The first attempt was deemed useless. Then he asked his friend Omkar Trivedi for a contact to some contract killers. Omkar put him in touch with Prashant Pari and solicited his services for 2 lakh rupees. They purchased knives from Chotila town and sought to kill Gopal at the Malia railway crossing. He told Harsuk to bring Gopal for a visa appointment and tail their car on a bike. But they didn't make it to the crossing in time, and the second attempt was foiled as well. Now the 24-year-old assassin Prashant Pari wanted 5 lakh rupees and 2 more accomplices, Bunty and Lakshman. Nitish was broke at this point. Bank records show that Kavaljit Singh transferred 25,000 rupees to aid him. But lo and behold, the third time wasn't the charm either. It too was foiled. Quote, the steel pipes and sticks the hitman had planned to use in the attack were seized as part of a random checking drive by the police, according to Gopal Kateshia for the Indian Express. It was the fourth attempt that brought the final blow. On February 8, 2017, Harsuk and Gopal were again called to Rajkot on the pretext of yet another visa appointment. By this point, they had been to more visa appointments than days Gopal had spent with his adopted parents. To ensure no goof-ups, Nitish accompanied them in his car, purporting to drop them off to their hut in Malia. It was 11:30 p.m. when Nitish asked his driver to pull aside on Highway 151. He said he was feeling motion sick and wanted to puke. Just as he began belching, 2 masked bikers pulled up. These were Rajpari and Lakshman. They grabbed Gopal and tried speeding off. I can only imagine how terrified that poor kid must have been. His only crime was being poor and vulnerable. Harsuk tried fending off the assailants. He jumped on them. They stabbed him endlessly until he could no longer hold on to Gopal. He lay beside the car, bloodied. With Gopal in their clutches, they drove a few meters ahead. Suddenly, Gopal's cries of help died. They died with him. The boy was stabbed to death and his body discarded like a carcass beside the road. In order to portray an alibi, Nitish drove the two to a hospital as if to say, hey, I care. But to his surprise, they were still breathing when they reached the hospital. Nitish wasn't planning on this. In fact, Harsuk was also able to muster a few words and gave his testimony for the FIR. They were hospitalized in the morning of February 9th. The innocent child, Gopal, succumbed to his multiple stab wounds on February 11th. His guardian, Harsuk, saw him die, and he too succumbed to his injuries on February 17th. Almost immediately, Nitish, Omkar, Rajpari, Lakshman and Mahendra Singh were arrested from Rajkot and Junagadh district. But don't let that give you hope, because almost immediately, they were all released on bail, and they are all currently free men. Well, what about the masterminds, you ask, Arti and Kavaljit Singh? They were arrested on June 5, 2017 when an Interpol red notice was issued on their name. Paperwork for extradition was initiated, but the hopelessness is the theme of this case. According to DIG Jajaria, who had supervised the probe in this case in the extradition, quote, extradition proceedings to India were initiated and a team of human rights consultants from the UK even flew to Gujarat to inspect the Junagadh jail. They gave a green signal to the facility, but the accused won an appeal in the UK against their extradition, end quote. The murderers yet again beat the system. Not only did they not get extradited, they were let go, free, despite having the blood of 2 people on their hands. But right when they got out of police custody, they resumed their life of crime. They were arrested twice for smuggling drugs in 2021, and then on January 31st this year, 2024, they were arrested for transporting 57 million pounds worth of cocaine from Australia to London. For this crime, they were finally put behind bars for 33 years. But to that broken family in Malia village living in tatters, justice is a far cry. Alpa lost 2 husbands in one lifetime and a younger brother. The criminals we talked about today haven't yet been brought to justice. Many of them walk among us as free people. If you know anything that could be helpful in bringing them to justice, reach out to the resources mentioned on the screen or in the description.
If you like what we do here at Desi Studios and absolutely love what we're wearing today, this is merch you can go buy all for yourself.
You can buy this Desi Crime merch in our YouTube store on the link down below at Kadak Merch. Keep the engines at Desi Studios rolling so we can pay our videographer right behind the camera to make these amazing episodes just for you.